Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our moderator for today, author of Watson's new biography, Final Jeopardy, Mr. Stephen Baker.
Thank you. Hello and welcome, everybody. We are here at IBM Research. This is the birthplace of Watson, the Jeopardy-playing phenom, who performed so well the last couple of nights on national television. And we're here with a panel to discuss Watson and Watson's implications, both how it can play Jeopardy so well and what it can do for its next job. So we have a panel of people here to discuss it with us. We have Kerry Holley. He's an IBM fellow, and he is looking into Watson's next job. Where will Watson find work? Kerry, would you like to join me here? We have Herbert Chase from Columbia University, from the medical school at Columbia University, and he is looking into the implications in medicine for Watson. And he has something to announce about that, too. And finally, we have the chief scientist on the IBM Watson team, Dr. David Ferrucci. So I thought I'd start with you, David. It's been 3 nights, and it actually had the match took place in January, but it's been really exciting the last 3 nights to see how the public responded to it and to see it on TV. There was a lot of discussion about from Jeopardy's perspective. They were interested in a really close game and great entertainment. From your perspective, did you ever want Watson to get one wrong, or did you want it to get everyone right and obliterate the human competition?
We played to win, and that's the important part. But I think in the bigger picture, what we played to do is to help people appreciate what this kind of challenge really means. What does it mean for computers to start to understand natural language, to answer questions accurately, to dig in and deeply understand that kind of content? And what we hoped is that people appreciated both the potential of this technology, but also the challenges involved. And I think when you get right and wrong answers, people start to see that. They start to see, wow, we can see where it gets slipped up. We see where this is really a hard problem.
Right. Yeah, I've been looking at a lot of comments, and there were comments here from Twitter about Watson perhaps being too fast on the buzzer for the humans. And people don't realize that just a couple of years ago, Watson took 2 hours to answer a single question and got a lot of them wrong. And so buzzer speed wasn't an issue in the beginning, was it?
No, the big challenge for the computer was, can it understand the question well enough? Can it understand the content well enough? Can it pull out the exact answer? Can it then decide whether or not the content it's analyzed supports that answer? In other words, whether the evidence is credible in some sense, and compute that probability that it's right. That's a huge computation. It considers many, many possibilities, lots of different pieces of evidence from many different directions. So to do that in 3 seconds or 3 seconds or less, that was the huge challenge, for the computer. If it can do that in time, then the computer has what I would call a fair advantage, which it happens to have a fast reaction time. But it's really dealing with the same interface the humans are. It has to push that same button, assuming it gets there quickly enough.
Right. But if the humans can anticipate. Humans have the power to listen to the end of Alex Trebek's sentence and anticipate it.
Exactly. So strictly speaking, from an interface perspective, the humans actually have the unfair advantage because they're listening to the clue and they can anticipate when the buzzer will be enabled. And when they do that, they could come in almost instantly in single-digit milliseconds and actually beat Watson out, even in its fastest reaction speed,
right,
because Watson's not listening and cannot anticipate. However, when they do that, they risk being locked out for a quarter of a second. So if they go to anticipate, while they can get in there in just a millisecond, if they come in too soon, they get locked out for a quarter of a second. So human players who do that have to be very, very good at it, very, very skilled at it, and some of them are.
Well, these two that Watson faced were famous for that.
That's right.
And the funny thing that Brad Rutter told me after the match was that he said he finally had an empathy for the people who had played against him and Ken. So, Carrie, was there anything that surprised you about Watson or questions that came up to you while watching those matches?
Well, probably the most interesting thing for me was my wife and kids. We all watched on Monday, and obviously, as Dave said, it doesn't do speech recognition, but my wife thought it did, and when he got that one question wrong, which was a repeat of a previous answer, she said, well, it just goes to prove that computer was built by men, and men don't listen. But
right.
But I thought I thought the announcement that came out today with Nuance Communications is, it really shows what's going to be possible when you actually connect the speech recognition and that with this, with Watson and its deep QA.
Okay, we're gonna talk about those deals in a minute, but I just want to continue just with the final game a little bit more. Watson went into Game 3 with a sizable lead, 25,000 over Rudder, 30,000 over Ken Jennings. So it had to think about its betting strategy, didn't it, David? Could you talk? It went through millions of simulated games.
That's right.
Can you tell us about how Watson comes to this decision? It comes up with these bizarre numbers that it bets.
That's subjective, really. The number is bizarre.
Okay.
But,
says one human.
Yeah, exactly. So, the lion's share of the effort was obviously in the natural language processing and understanding, but we had some really, really smart people looking at the strategy piece as well. While a smaller effort, nonetheless, a very interesting one. And we did many simulations. We looked at human betting behaviors. What Watson was considering is prior probabilities. What's the likelihood it would get something right or wrong? What's the state of the board? How much money does it have? How much money does its competitors have? How much more money is left on the board? What can happen going forward? All of that is the input, and then it's doing many simulations in different scenarios to decide what's the optimal bet here. So there's a lot going into that. We're dealing with probabilities and real numbers, so you're going to get these they're not well-rounded numbers the way humans like to think about them. It really doesn't care. The computer doesn't care. In fact, at one point, one of the folks from the strategy team said to me, these are people tend to round the numbers off to an even zero or something. Do you want to do that? I said, why? It's a machine. It likes that number. That's fine. Let's go with that. That's what you see there. And in terms of the numbers, I think other people comment on how some of the betting seemed odd to them, but it was actually quite well rationalized, and the result was good.
Now, one of the things you told me during this Watson's education process was that Watson can calculate its odds of winning at every juncture of the game. And so did your team look after that first game and see how sure Watson was of winning the match?
So what happened after the first game when it went into that final Jeopardy? And I think that Alex, we actually got it wrong, and that's the Toronto question. I know you're not going to ask me about that.
Oh, I wouldn't dream of it.
So at that point, I think Alex, we came out with a very small bet, like $947 or something. And I think Alex said, oh, what a sneak. People expected Watson to bet big, and because it had the wrong answer, lose big. But that was really just halftime. Watson had a big lead. So the strategy there was, why risk that lead at this point? So even without even knowing the category and the question, it was going to bet small. It was going to try to maintain that lead.
But did it know what its chances were to prevail in the double match? It probably did. It probably had a 94% or 95%.
Generally speaking, it has prior probabilities. But I mean, the chance of it winning a Jeopardy match is not that high. I mean, it's not in the 90s.
You said if it has a $30,000 lead.
Oh, at that point, yes.
Yeah.
Now it's saying, I want to hold on to this lead. This is what's giving me an advantage.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. Herb, was there anything that you noticed watching the game that you'd like to ask Dave about?
I was just struck. I had mentioned this to Dave previously. I was struck by the fact that it occurred to me that most people watching the show probably had no idea of the phenomenal computational power and the effort to answer those questions. The questions were incredibly hard, and the two contestants, I think, they're exceptions. They're not the rule. They're not the typical person. So I was just wondering what people around the country were thinking when they were watching this, and maybe sort of blasé about it. I mean, we have smartphones that can get the restaurant or tell you where you are in life, and there's an expectation that some machine can answer all the questions. And I think perhaps they probably under realized how exceptional the machine is in answering those questions.
Right. A lot of people just think it has a bunch of answers in it. It just picks one out.
Computers know everything.
Right.
Yeah,
computers know everything.
I was afraid they were going to turn on the computer when the leads started mounting up. They're going to start feeling for the human.
Well, one of the things I came up with while writing the book and telling people I was working on the book was people would say, oh, doesn't Google do that? And so I had to explain that Google only leads you to the answer, and you have to use your magnificent mind to find it, and that's a difference with Watson.
Well, and I think what's so important about this is, again, the Jeopardy game is sort of question and answer out. And I think when you imagine applications, what's really going to be interesting isn't just this answer, it's going to be why. Why that answer? Why do you think this is a reasonable response? And it's sorting, filtering, assessing, combining, and weighing the evidence. And when you can reveal that to the human and help them make a decision, it's a whole different story. And that's really what's behind that number you see on that answer panel. That's why it was so important, I think, to put that answer panel up there and show the confidence in the fact that it has different answers that are competing, essentially competing hypotheses, in Watson's program, trying to decide, why do I believe one over the other? Because that gives you a window into what's going on inside of the computer, and also gives you a window into why this is an important technology for applications.
Right. A story about that you told me was that Alex Trebek came here and he checked out Watson, and he thought the answer panel might get in the way of viewers enjoying the match because it's something new and people get Jeopardy routines. So he had his doubts about the Jeopardy panel, the answer panel. So after lunch one day, you told them to take the answer panel down, and Trebek had to suffer through a game without the answer panel. And he asked for it to be put back up. And then I asked him about it later, and he said, God, without the answer panel, it was boring as hell.
Right.
Okay, now I have a couple of questions that, let's get one out of the hand right away. Ahmad Hassan on Twitter asks, how much did this thing cost?
So, well, you can do the math, but we had about average between 20 and 25 technical team researchers working on this for about 4 years. So about 20, 25 people working on it a year for 4 years.
Okay, and then there's some hardware involved.
And there's some hardware, right? But that's Power 750s. You can buy one today. It's off the shelf. I can give you a price list if you'd like.
Right. Well, people ask me how much it costs. I said, including promotion? Okay. Now, there was one question here about Above Themist on Twitter asks, do you plan for him one day to understand speech? And that comes into the nuance thing. First, Dave, is speech something that Watson, how much work would it take to bring that to happen?
We have great research here at IBM, and of course we're partnering with Nuance now, which is they're one of the leaders in voice or speech recognition. When we started the Watson Challenge, though, admittedly we were so focused on the natural language processing, the question answering, and we really wanted to stay focused on that as the core challenge and the core technology. We knew that in applications and beyond that, you'd want to tie in other modalities like speech and even images, and we're very excited about doing that. But we sort of wanted to stay focused this time around on that. In fact, to be, and I don't know if few people probably know this, but we were so focused on that aspect of the challenge that when we first envisioned this, we thought, Watson would get the question as like a text message, essentially. It would compute its answer and collect its evidence, analyze it, and do all that stuff. And then it would just type the answer out on the screen. And when we talked to Jeopardy about this in the beginning, they were like, you got to be kidding me. That's so boring. Can't it just speak it? And we're like, speak it? Oh, really? You want us to do that too? But, we have really good text-to-speech technology here when we brought that in, and that really changed it a lot. In fact, that made it a lot more interesting and exciting for people to watch.
Right. Now, Carrie, when Watson eventually has to go and look for work, and it's apparently finding some already.
Yes.
A lot of people say, well, it answers Jeopardy questions. I mean, that's not very useful. But you were telling me that you can actually maybe hook up Watson's front end, its speech and natural language capabilities, with other types of analytics on the back end. Could you tell us about some of the opportunities there?
Absolutely. Clearly, business analytics is a huge area. Some of the things that Dave mentioned in terms of improving decision-making, making fact-based decisions, evidence-based decisions, this is something that C-suite executives are going to love. If you think about what the PC has done to enable and make them more effective, if you think about what the internet has done, I think this represents a next stage of evolution, because suddenly they have the C-suite assistant and they can begin to ask questions like, okay, if I do this, if I do that, what impact will that have on my profit? What impact will that have on my revenue? If I'm a company that's under siege financially and I have to make some cuts in my marketing budget, or do I cut what I spend on television? Do I cut the print?
Well, do you cut the people who are answering those questions that you're asking Watson?
Exactly. So, but suddenly I can ask these questions, and as Dave said, not only do I get an answer, I get a probability, but I also get the reason why those answers are an 80% probability or 70%. So I think that's an example of a C-suite assistant that's going to be a powerful tool based on analytics, based on the all the technologies that you see in Watson.
So you can imagine sort of a junior C-suite person preparing himself to go into the office and have to debate Watson in front of the big boss.
Well, the brilliance of humans is their ability to ask questions.
Right.
And that's what the machine doesn't do right now. So this is a great compliment.
Well, it asks questions when it answers clues on Jeopardy.
Wow.
Okay. Well, tell us just about the Nuance deal. What is it? What's that going to be? Is Watson going to be manning call centers?
I'm going to let Dave. I think he knows a bit more about the Nuance communication, but it's clearly going to add a new element of speech recognition to Watson.
Yeah, I think Nuance is not only a leader in the speech recognition, but also in clinical language understanding, and working in the healthcare space. And I think what we imagine happening is taking the power that is underlying Watson, combining with their strengths, and going out there and learning how to use this technology to help healthcare professionals make better decisions, higher quality, faster diagnostics, as well as looking at and evaluating treatment options. And I think the real power of this technology isn't about giving you the final and end-all answer here. It's about helping you look at a huge array of information that's really sometimes beyond the scope of our ability to do it or to do it quickly enough, organize it, assess it, weigh it, and provide that analysis to the healthcare professional so they can drill in and they could get more confidence that they're looking at the breadth of the information out there and make basically better decisions, again, whether it be diagnosis or whether it be treatment. And I think Dr. Chase can comment on that even more.
I'd like to hear, you have a new agreement. You're going to be incorporating Watson.
Yes, absolutely. Well, and Watson has several roles. The simplest one is answering doctors' questions. It's been studied for years. At the end of the day, doctors have an incredible number of questions that they go home with that they haven't answered, that they would like the answers to, and there's just simply not enough time in the day to answer those questions. And even if given the time, they still can't necessarily find the right resources. So I think Watson showed us how successful the machine is at answering questions, and the same machine can be applied to answering medical questions. The domain actually is a little bit smaller than all of human language. Medicine has structured words, and to some extent, the question and answering may even be faster. Watson also has the potential of asking its own questions, if you will, of the medical record. We have a national effort now to have electronic medical records in every doctor's office in the next several years. The government has put in billions of dollars. And Watson can troll through the electronic record, looking at the natural language. Patient complained of this problem or that problem. They may have mentioned a side effect. Watson can do some association studies and see that that side effect is associated with a particular drug, and that's not well substantiated. It can make diagnoses. For example, probably over 50% of patients with mild chronic kidney disease their physicians are unaware of this. Watson could easily figure that out through the electronic medical record by sort of posing the Jeopardy questions, picking out keywords, and looking to see if the diagnosis can be made. Dave also mentioned the treatment aspect, which is far more complicated because humans are individuals, and all treatments have to be tailored to the individual. And so the same treatment that's recommended for an 80-year-old will not be the same treatment for the 40-year-old. And Watson has the capability of looking at all the different groups, which would be humanly impossible for a physician to be able to access all that. And Watson can actually come up with the probabilities. Well, in this age group, this seems to be more effective than that, even though the guidelines are blanket and cover all ages. So there are many areas where Watson can be an assistant. I think that's the term that is being used now, and we call it decision support in our field.
And what's the timetable? When do you expect Watson to actually be doing valuable work in this area?
Well, I don't know if, how much of this has been discussed previously, but one of the projects that we're working on with the team here is actually looking at how well Watson answers medical questions. And it's doing incredibly well. I've got a couple students working with me on the analysis of this, and it's mind-boggling to all of us that Watson knows as much as it does. At one point, we entertained the idea of having a Jeopardy-like event at my medical school to have Watson square off against the residents, and I thought that would be impossible. Then I thought, well, we'll let the residents have their iPhones and all their. I mean, there's no criticism of any. Humans are incapable of managing the opus. So I thought, well, we'd give them even all the devices that they have to find the information. But that is not going to do the trick either. And so now I'm sort of backing away of thinking that maybe it's not such a good idea. So the fidelity of the answers, and again, as Dave mentioned, I think it's an important point. Often there's no one right answer in medicine. We call it a differential diagnosis. We don't want to know the most likely. We want to know the whole group of possible diagnoses, because the patient may have a 90% chance of having A, but we also have to be remembering B and C, which which are much lower in frequency. We have to keep those in our mind, and so it's nice for us to see the diagnosis, the complete differential, which Watson can generate, and then also get the evidence.
But I think you should still reconsider the challenge against the residents. Because, in the end, humans win, really. It's all about how,
Yeah.
Dave, I have one question that comes up all the time. Does Watson think?
What's my favorite response to that? Do submarines swim? What do you really mean by think? I think we have, everyone has a different sense of that. I like to look at it as sort of a task-based view. When you think of Watson playing Jeopardy, it's acting like an intelligent Jeopardy player. If you deconstruct its intelligence, you're going to find lots of different algorithms. No one of them you would look at and say, wow, that's a really intelligent and really understands the answer and deeply understands the language. You have this holistic effect where it's solving a problem that you formerly think it takes humans to really think to solve that problem. Watson's doing it in perhaps a different way, a way that if you went in and deconstructed it, you might not be impressed with any one algorithm, but when you put it all together and you combine it in the way we did with this architecture, you end up with a very impressive result. And I think of it ultimately as a tool, that helps humans solve problems. You want that result when you're sitting there trying to sift through huge amounts of information. You want this thing to be doing that deep analysis for you and to help you get that evidence and make that decision. So is it thinking? I don't know. Does it really matter how we think about that?
No, it doesn't matter that much, but it comes up a lot. But actually, while learning about Watson, while I did this book, I was struck by how it reminded me of studying a foreign language, and how sometimes somebody will say something to you in a foreign language and you're missing one word. And so then you have other evidence that you're looking for. You're looking for the context. You're looking for all kinds of evidence about what that word might be. And then you're developing your own degree of confidence in your understanding of that answer. And it's just like Watson.
So what you described there is similar to the way algorithms in Watson work. But just to be clear, we didn't sit down and try to build Watson from the perspective of understanding how the human mind works.
No.
We really did not do that. But having said that, it's fair to say that when we sat there as a team and looked at the challenges that we had, and we would do error analysis and figure out why are we missing these kinds of things, we would develop algorithms. And often what would inspire those algorithms is how we would solve the problem.
Right.
And we would think exactly along the lines that you mentioned. We have to go out and look for related concepts based on what we find there, and according to what relation, what do we do with that?
Right.
How do we then expand our search or prune our search? And it would be based on how we might solve it. And that's just what we're conscious of. What you described is what you're conscious of doing. But I think there's so much going on in the human mind that we're actually not really conscious of. One of the interesting questions that came out in the exhibition games that I thought was fascinating was the one about characters, literary characters, and there was the abbreviation APB, All Points Bulletin.
Right.
And I think Alex actually expanded that abbreviation in the game. Watson had no idea how to expand that abbreviation. And in fact, any three letters can mean really anything. And you have to sort of use context to try to expand the abbreviation, accurately. And what would APB have to do with, these characters and these literary characters? So very, very hard abbreviation to expand meaningfully in that context. Moreover, what was expected there for humans to do is to go from the notion of an APB, all points bulletin, to the idea that the answer should be criminal in nature or evil in nature. And that's one aspect, of the character. So this is a huge leap, right, that humans do almost instantly. We have algorithms in there that attempt to do that. But if you think about a computer trying to expand APB, getting lots and lots of possibilities, and then from there going to what are all the things that might be related to, trying to connect it back to characters in literature, how do I get there? And yet humans, again, human questions written for humans, they can traverse that very quickly. It's really amazing.
Yeah. Well, I wrote about that on my blog, and one of the commenters said, well, okay, even if it didn't understand APB, it should have understood that victims are associated with villainy. And I said, well, lots of victims aren't victims of circumstance. There's no... Right. But Watson, a computer has to say, well, in some cases, victims are associated with villainy, and Watson would probably come up with a percentage of times that it's associated with that.
Right, so it's tricky, very tricky.
Right. Now, I'd just like to talk about one future application. One that struck me as interesting was travel.
Yes.
If you have a system like this that can understand, probably through a smartphone.
Yes.
And what kind of services could a Watson provide in the travel industry?
Well, I think there's a couple that come to mind. For one, if we look at city planners who are planning traffic, dealing with congestion, dealing with weather, dealing with accidents, this can provide another tool to help those planners make better decisions, dynamic, real-time decisions in terms of routing traffic. But I also think, I sort of look at it as a navigator on steroids, that whether it's our smartphone, whether it's a navigator in our car, we also now would basically have this capability as well, have access to this in the future, where we would be able to ask questions about, okay, I need to get here in 5 minutes, there's an accident on the road right now, what do you recommend?
Right.
And I think that's a powerful capability as well. And I also think, as I said, with city planners, the ability to plan. And also from a travel standpoint, from a travel and entertainment standpoint, our ability, maybe I'm stuck in Alaska and I need to get to London or whatever the situation is, but the ability to now be able to use this technology to help not just get me out of a bind, but maybe recreationally to help me plan the most optimum trip based on my preferences, based on what's happening in the world. So lots of possibilities.
Mm-hmm. Now, Herb, one of the things that people worry about, people are a little bit worried about powerful computers like this in their lives. And, it's been made very clear that Watson is not a doctor. Watson is an assistant. But it's an assistant that leaves records of things. And so if a doctor is faced with a difficult diagnosis, and a Watson-like machine comes up with several suggestions, and the doctor doesn't pay attention to those because, for one reason or another, they don't seem likely. And then it turns out that the patient did have what Watson suggested. Are there liability problems there? Is there a whole...
I'm going to pass on the liability issue. I'm not really sure, and obviously one would be concerned about that. I think a physician wants to be up to date on everything. It's built into their makeup. They want to know the right answers. If Watson presents a group of diagnostic possibilities with some evidence, then the physician is going to do the additional step of whatever, digging deep and trying to understand. And so I would be surprised if Watson was being employed and offering some diagnostic possibilities and had it completely ignored. It's not to say that a physician might say, well, this demographic doesn't fit at all with this possible diagnosis, and this person lives in the wrong part of the country, and so I'm going to ignore all that. But I think my hunch is that it's going to be embraced. Just to reiterate the point I made before about answering questions, it is very painful, for want of a better term, for a physician to have spent so many years training to be aware of the information gaps that they can't bridge using even the most up-to-date current technology. They don't have the time, they don't have the skills, and the amount of information is so vast on both the diagnostic and treatment side that any machine that is going to bring the information with the evidence to them, which they can then mull over and decide whether or not to act on, it will be embraced.
Right. I mean,
and I'm also, just as a one further side, I sort of divided up in the generations in medical school, you know, BG before Google and AG after Google. This, I think, some of these points about acceptance and usage will be moot when the current after Google generation comes in. And if anything, they'll be complaining about not having Watson on their cell phones, being able to go to the bedside and call things in using the technology.
Right. One of the things I've appreciated about Watson is that it, in a sense, keeps an open mind. It's willing to entertain possibilities that many computers would just say do not compute. And so it's able to do that. And in medicine, perhaps, and in many other areas, it might come up with ideas that we wouldn't think, that we would rule out because they don't seem to make sense. And some of those areas could be breakthroughs, and some of them could be real mind-blowing.
Well, it uses the scientific paradigm. It creates a hypothesis, and then it goes to see if it makes a deduction. If that's true, then I should be able to find that. Right. And if a set of diagnostic possibilities come up, then Watson is in the position of saying, well, why don't you measure these three things to nail down with higher confidence or rule out with lower confidence the things that I've just suggested to you.
And this is, to me, what's really most exciting, frankly, about what we've accomplished. I mean, traditionally, when you try to build sort of classic expert systems, you formally try to model all the knowledge you have, and you build very precise classifications, and humans tediously write down many, many different inference rules. But then when the data doesn't line up perfectly with that representation, you can't apply it anymore. So however smart it might be, you can't apply it. So immediately, the solution becomes sort of brittle and narrow based on how you've anticipated the problem would present. And I think what Watson does is it starts to deal with that massive amount of information that hasn't been curated and manually organized based on a very specific view of the world, and says, I can start dealing with this. It's going to be more plastic. It's going to be more flexible. It's going to use some rules, but it's also going to use statistical methods, statistical natural language processing, and statistical machine learning. It's going to combine and weigh these scores. So now it's going to be able to deal with that much greater breadth, but it's going to deal with it more intelligently. Is it going to have that kind of axiomatic precision that you get out of those classic knowledge bases? It's not going to do that, but what it will do is it will get better and better at assessing that evidence, being more flexible about it, considering things that were out of scope of that more constrained system, and then put that value in front of the decision maker, in front of the healthcare provider, in front of the physician, so that they can make the final assessment. Yes, that's a good point. I didn't realize that. I realize now why that's so important, or why I should consider that. That's very, very powerful.
I'm going to end with one question, and this is based on one that comes from Oleg Mflow on Twitter. I'm going to refashion it. If Watson were faced with this clue on Jeopardy, what would its answer be? This computer won a historic match against Ken Jennings and Brad Rutter in 2011. What would Watson's answer be?
Watson's answer, if its information was updated based on everything that's going on in the news, would probably be Watson.
But how often do you update it?
Well, right now, not that, not that often. But
job's over.
I've been busy. The team has been busy.
Right. Well, listen, I would like to thank the members of the panel and the audience. And if anybody has further questions, we'd like to keep this conversation going. There are two places to go, TED.com/conversation and IBMWatson.com. Thank you very much. Thank you.